Karoline Leavitt stepped into her old high school gym, the shimmer of the alumni fundraiser clashing with echoes of a past she'd left behind. Amid the glitz, a lone janitor, an old man with a mop and a story no one bothered to hear, caught her eye. Then came the sneers, a pack of rich ex-classmates, their words dripping with contempt, mocking him like he was nothing. What happened next flipped the town on its head, unraveling secrets that hit harder than a freight train. One man's quiet life was about to explode into a legacy no one could have predicted. Want to hear how this real-life story unfolds? Leave a comment below. Has someone's quiet strength ever surprised you? If you connect with true stories about people standing up for what's right, consider subscribing. We've got another honest tale coming your way tomorrow that's worth sticking around for. Karoline Leavitt stepped into the high school gym, the buzz of the alumni fundraiser hitting her like a wave. The event was all glitz, shiny banners, clinking glasses, voices overlapping with forced laughter. She'd come back to this New Hampshire school as a favor, a nod to her roots. But it felt like stepping into a half-forgotten dream. A congressional candidate from this state once, a press aide in Trump's White House, she'd built a name for herself, a conservative voice who'd weathered storms. Yet here, amid the polished crowd, something tugged at her. Not the nostalgia of pep rallies or locker-lined halls, but a quieter memory, one she couldn't quite place. Then she saw him, Walter Hensley, the janitor, hunched over a mop in a gray uniform faded to a whisper of its original color. 80 years old, still working. Still here. He moved slowly, pushing the mop across the floor with a rhythm that felt etched into his bones. Karoline stopped, her polished heels rooted to the spot. She knew him, or rather, she'd known of him. Back when she raced through these halls, head full of big plans, Walter had been a shadow in the background. A fixture like the scuffed desks or the buzzing fluorescents. She'd seen him countless times, maybe tossed him a quick wave once or twice, but never really looked. Now, she couldn't look away. His hands, gnarled and trembling slightly, gripped the handle. His uniform hung loose, a silent testament to years piled on years. Why was he still here? The question lodged in her chest, sharp and insistent. Choice? Need? Something worse? The fundraiser hummed around her, old classmates swapping stories, their designer suits and practice smiles a stark contrast to Walter's quiet labor. Karoline barely registered them. Her eyes stayed on him, tracing the lines of his face, each one a story she'd never bothered to hear. She'd built her career on calling out unfairness, speeches, debates, press briefings, but this hit different. Personal. He'd been here when she was a kid, mopping up spills while she plotted her future. She'd moved on, DC campaigns, headlines, while he'd stayed, still mopping, still pushing, still here. The realization twisted something in her gut. Had she ever thanked him? Had anyone? The thought stung, a pinprick of guilt she couldn't shake. She took a step closer, her breath catching as he wrung out the mop, water splattering into the bucket. He didn't look up, just kept working, steady but frail. Karoline crossed her arms, wrestling with the unease bubbling inside. She'd assumed he'd retired long ago, feet up somewhere with a modest pension. Not this. Not still scrubbing floors like time had forgotten him. Was it pride keeping him here? Poverty? Had the system she'd spent years defending or fighting failed him? She'd heard the stories. Pensions too thin, savings eaten up by bills. But seeing it in Walter, in the slump of his shoulders, made it real. Too real. Her mind flashed to those high school days. Endless ambition, late nights dreaming big. He'd been there too, unnoticed, while she chased the spotlight. The crowd's chatter faded to a dull roar as she stood there, caught between past and present. Walter had been invisible to her back then, just part of the building. She'd been too busy, too wrapped up in herself to care. Now, with every slow swipe of his mop, that indifference gnawed at her. She'd walked these halls as a kid, oblivious, while he'd kept them clean. For her, for all of them, and she'd never seen him. Not like this. Her jaw tightened. What if he didn't want to be here? What if he'd been forced to keep going, too stubborn or too broke to stop? The idea hit harder than she expected, a mix of anger and shame she couldn't name. Karoline straightened, her resolve clicking into place. She wasn't here to sip wine and swap small talk, not anymore. Walter Hensley deserved better than this, better than a mop and a paycheck that barely covered the basics. She didn't know his story yet, but she'd find out. She had to. Her time in politics, facing down critics and cutting through noise had taught her one thing. When something's wrong, you don't just stand there, you act. And this quiet old man, still tethered to a bucket, felt wrong in a way she couldn't ignore. She took a deep breath, eyes locked on him. Whatever came next, she wasn't walking away. Not from this. Karoline stood near the edge of the gym, her eyes fixed on Walter Hensley as he pushed his mop across the floor. The fundraiser pulsed around her, laughter, clinking glasses, a low hum of self-congratulation from the alumni. She barely noticed. Walter's slow, deliberate movements held her attention, a quiet defiance against the noise. She was still processing the weight of seeing him here, still working, when a sharp voice cut through the chatter. "Well, look at this, old man still at it," Ethan Caldwell sneered, his tailored suit gleaming as he swaggered over with 2 buddies in tow. "Guess some people are just born to lose, huh?" His friends chuckled, their Rolexes catching the light. "A real waste of space," one added, tossing back a drink. Karoline's blood boiled. She stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Back off, Ethan, he's not your punching bag." Ethan turned, his grin widening as he sized her up. "Oh, Karoline Leavitt, Trump's little puppet graces us with her presence. What's this, your next photo op?" His tone dripped with venom and his buddies snickered. "You gonna save the janitor now?" "That's rich coming from a hypocrite who kissed the ring in D.C. Karoline clenched her fists, her nails digging in. "He's worth more than you'll ever be," she shot back. "Maybe if you'd ever done an honest day's work, you'd get it." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his smirk twisting into something uglier. "Honest work? From you? Miss Locker-Up cheerleader? Spare me the sanctimony. You're just fishing for votes, or headlines." He leaned in, voice dropping. "Keep pushing this, and I'll make sure everyone knows what a fraud you are. I've got friends in high places. Your reputation's toast, if I say so." The threat hung heavy, but Karoline didn't flinch. "Try it," she hissed. "I've faced bigger bullies than you and walked away standing. He deserves better than this, and I'm not letting it go." "You think you're some savior?" Ethan laughed, sharp and cold. "Look at him, 80 and still scrubbing floors. That's on him, not me. Maybe he likes being the bottom feeder." His friends nodded, one chiming in, "Yeah, don't waste your breath, Leavitt. He's nobody." Karoline's vision blurred with rage. "Nobody?" she snapped. "He kept this place running while you flunked gym and chased cheerleaders. Show some respect." Ethan squared up, his face darkening. "Respect? From you? The gal who parroted every lie Trump fed her? You don't get to lecture me. Step off or I'll bury you." The air crackled between them, but before she could fire back, Karoline turned to Walter. He'd paused, mop still, watching the exchange with tired eyes. She softened her tone, stepping closer. "Mr. Hensley, I'm sorry about them. I don't get why you're still here. You shouldn't have to do this." Walter's gaze hardened, and he straightened, his voice gravelly but steady. "Don't need your sorry, girl, or your help. I'm fine right where I am." Karoline blinked, caught off guard. "Fine? You're 80, breaking your back for peanuts. You deserve to rest." He shook his head, gripping the mop tighter. "Rest? I don't need some politician telling me what I deserve. You think I want your pity?" His words cut cold and firm. Karoline pressed on, undeterred. "It's not pity, it's right. You've given enough. Let me help you stop." Walter's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, his voice rising. "Help? I've been mopping these floors since before you were born. I don't need you swooping in, acting like I'm your charity case. Back off." The rejection stung, sharper than Ethan's taunts. She opened her mouth to argue, but Ethan's laugh broke in. "See, even he knows you're full of it, Leavitt. Stick to your press conferences. This ain't your lane." Karoline spun back to him, fury flaring. "Shut it, Ethan. You don't get to talk down to him. Or me. I'm doing this because it matters." Ethan crossed his arms, smirking. "Matters? To who? Your ego? Keep it up and I'll drag your name through the mud so fast you'll wish you'd stayed in D.C. His buddies nodded, egging him on, but Karoline stood her ground. "Do your worst. I've taken hits you can't imagine. He's not invisible anymore. Not on my watch." Walter grunted, turning back to his mop. "Don't need you watching nothin'," he muttered. "Leave me be." His dismissal landed like a slap, but Karoline's resolve only deepened. Ethan's threats, Walter's stubbornness, they fueled her. She wasn't here to play nice. She'd fought bigger battles, press rooms, campaign trails, and won. This was personal now. Walter might not want her help, and Ethan might try to crush her, but she'd be damned if she let either stop her. She'd find a way. She had to. Karoline didn't waste time. Walter's rejection and Ethan's threats only lit a fire under her. She slipped away from the fundraiser, phone in hand, and dialed Brian Mitchell, an old friend turned financial whiz. "Brian, I need you," she said, voice tight. "Walter Hensley, the janitor here, he's still working at 80. I'm starting a fund to get him out. You in?" Brian paused, then chuckled. "You don't mess around, do you?" "Yeah, I'll crunch the numbers. How much we aiming for?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Enough to retire him, whatever it takes." She hung up, opened her social media and typed, "Walter Hensley's spent decades keeping our school clean. He's 80, still mopping. Let's give him the rest he deserves, link below." The post went live and donations poured in, $5, $20, $100 at a time. By morning, it hit $80,000. She strode back into the school the next day, buoyed by the numbers, ready to tell Walter. But trouble was already brewing. Linda Pierce, the new principal, intercepted her in the hall, arms crossed. "Karoline, what the hell are you doing?" Linda's voice was ice. "I saw your little fundraiser. This school's not your soapbox." Karoline squared her shoulders. "It's not about me, it's about Walter. He shouldn't be working himself to death." Linda scoffed. "Walter's a burden we've tolerated too long. He's not worth this circus. Drop it or I'll fire him myself." Karoline's jaw dropped. "Fire him? For what? Being old? You can't be serious." Linda leaned in, eyes hard. "I'm dead serious. Keep this up and he's gone. I don't need your bleeding heart stunt tanking our reputation." Before Karoline could snap back, her phone buzzed. An alert from X. Ethan Caldwell had posted, "Leavitt's at it again, using a janitor to polish her halo. Don't buy her act." Comments exploded, half calling her a fraud, half cheering her on. She stormed toward him as he lounged near the gym, smirking. "You're a real piece of work, Ethan," she spat. "Spreading lies to protect your ego?" He laughed, loud and mean. "Lies? Everyone knows you're a fame chaser. That $80,000 is just your latest prop. Admit it, you don't give a damn about him." Karoline stepped closer, voice trembling with fury. "I care more than you ever will. You're the one who let him rot for a quick laugh." Ethan's grin vanished. "Care? You're a joke. Trump's mouthpiece turned saint. I've got people sending emails right now, anonymous, trashing you to every news outlet in this state. You're done." Karoline's stomach lurched, but she held her ground. "Go ahead. Smear me. It won't change the truth. That money's for Walter, not me." Ethan sneered. "Truth? He's a nobody. You're just too blind to see it. Push this and I'll make sure you're the laughingstock of New Hampshire." The community split. Some donated more, others echoed Ethan's venom. Karoline's resolve wavered, but she shoved it down. She'd faced worse. She'd win this. She found Walter in a side hallway, mop in hand. "Mr. Hensley," she started, forcing calm, "we raised $80,000 for you. You can stop now. Rest. Live a little." Walter froze, then turned, his face darkening. "What'd you do?" he growled. Karoline blinked. People pitched in. It's yours." He slammed the mop against the bucket, water splashing. "I told you I don't want your damn charity," he shouted. 20 years I've saved, every dime, for a science lab right here. Not for me, for them kids. You're ruining it." Karoline recoiled, stunned. "A lab? I didn't know. I was trying to help you." "Help," Walter roared, hurling the bucket at the wall with a crash. "You're killing my dream, you meddling fool. I don't need your money. I've got mine." His voice echoed, raw and furious. Karoline's chest tightened. "You can't mean that," she said, voice cracking. "You're breaking your back for nothing. Let me fix this." Walter stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Fix? You've fixed nothing. You've turned me into your pity project. Shame on you." He grabbed the mop, shoving past her. "Get out of my sight." Karoline stood there, reeling, his words cutting deeper than Ethan's barbs. Her phone buzzed again. "Linda, I meant it, Karoline." The principal snapped over the line. "One more move and Walter's fired. End this now." Karoline's hands shook. "You'd punish him for my fight? That's low, even for you." Linda's tone turned glacial. "It's your mess. Clean it up or he pays." The call ended and Karoline's head spun. Ethan's emails were hitting inboxes. Nasty, twisted lies about her motives. Walter's rage still burned in her ears. The $80,000 felt like a weight, not a win. She'd pushed too hard, and now it was crumbling. Linda's threat, Ethan's sabotage, Walter's fury. But giving up wasn't in her. She'd fought dirtier battles. She'd find a way through this mess no matter who stood in her way. Karoline stared at her phone, the $80,000 fundraiser page glaring back at her. Walter's fury, the bucket crashing against the wall, replayed in her head. Ethan's lies were spreading like wildfire, and Linda's threat loomed large. She couldn't keep this going. With a heavy breath, she hit delete on the fund, posting a curt update. Fundraisers off, respecting Walter's wishes, thanks for the support. The comments flooded in. Some praised her, others jeered. Told you she's a fake. She tossed the phone aside, sinking into a chair. Failure tasted bitter. Had she misread everything? Forced help on a man who didn't want it? Her gut churned. She'd wanted to fix an injustice, but now she wondered if she'd just made a mess. The backlash hit fast. Ethan's rumors had turned half the town against her. She'd fought battles before, press screams, campaign attacks, but this felt personal, a gut punch she couldn't dodge. She called Brian Mitchell, voice low. "It's done, Brian. I pulled the plug." He sighed. "You sure? We had momentum." Karoline shook her head, though he couldn't see it. "Walter threatened to quit. Linda's ready to fire him. Ethan's tearing me apart. I'm out." Brian paused. "You tried, Karoline. That's more than most would." She hung up, unconvinced. Trying wasn't enough when it ended like this. Unbeknownst to her, a group of current students had caught wind of Walter's dream. They'd overheard his outburst about the science lab and quietly launched their own effort. Bake sales, a small GoFundMe, pooling allowances. In days, they'd raised enough to build it, naming it after him. Walter found out when they unveiled it, a modest room with new equipment, his name on a plaque. He'd nodded, said nothing, and kept it from Karoline. She didn't know. To her, the silence meant she'd lost. Her efforts, hours on the phone, rallying strangers, felt like dust. She'd pushed, and it had all crumbled. Ethan wasn't done. A video popped up online, him smirking into the camera, holding a mop. Karoline Leavitt, folks. Thought she'd play hero, but the janitor told her where to shove it. Watch her flop. Clips of her fundraiser post flashed, spliced with mocking laughter. Views climbed into the thousands. Karoline's hands shook as she watched, rage mixing with shame. She dialed him, voice tight. "Take it down, Ethan. This isn't a game." He laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, it's a game and you lost. Keep talking and I'll sue you for defamation. Shut your mouth or I'll own you." She slammed the phone down. "Try it," she muttered. But the damage was done. Her name was mud. Linda piled on. At a parent meeting that night, she stood at a podium, voice cutting. "Karoline Leavitt's turned our school into her personal crusade. She's a troublemaker, nothing more. We don't need her chaos." Parents murmured, some nodding. Karoline, there to explain herself, stood up. "Chaos? I was fighting for Walter, something you wouldn't do." Linda's eyes flashed. "Fighting? You nearly cost him his job. Sit down or leave." Karoline bristled. "You threatened him, not me. Own it." Linda smirked. "I protect this school. You disrupt it. Get out." The room went silent, all eyes on Karoline. She walked out, head high but heart sinking, publicly humiliated again. She tried Walter next, tracking him down in a hallway. "Mr. Hensley, can we talk?" she asked, softer now. He didn't turn, just kept sweeping. A coworker stepped in. "He don't want to see you," the man said, gruff. "Told me to tell you you're good at wrecking things. That's it." Karoline froze. "Wrecking? I was trying to help him." The coworker shrugged. "He don't see it that way. Let it go." Walter's back stayed to her, a wall she couldn't breach. "Tell him I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. The man nodded, but Walter didn't flinch. She left, his words, secondhand but brutal, ringing in her ears. Her phone buzzed. Another email, forwarded from Brian. Subject: "Leavitt's a fraud." Ethan's anonymous smear campaign had hit local news inboxes, painting her as a manipulative opportunist. She skimmed it, stomach twisting. She used an old man for clout. Don't trust her. Lies, but believable ones. The town was split. Some still defended her, others called her a disgrace. She felt the walls closing in. Linda's public attack, Walter's rejection, Ethan's video and threats. She was alone, cornered. She'd faced heat in D.C., taken punches on the campaign trail, but this was different, personal. Raw. Had she been wrong all along? Karoline sat in her car staring at the school. The lab was done, she'd later learn, but not then. All she saw was failure. $80,000 gone, her name trashed, Walter hating her. Ethan's lawsuit threat loomed, Linda's words stung, and Walter's silence crushed her. She gripped the wheel, questioning everything. She'd wanted to lift him up, but she'd fallen instead. The fight wasn't over, she didn't quit, but right now she was out of moves. Isolated, battered, she drove off, the weight of it all pressing down. A week after Karoline drove away, her phone rang. She was back in D.C. licking her wounds when Brian Mitchell's name lit up the screen. "Karoline," he said, voice heavy. "Walter's gone. Heart attack last night. Found him in the hallway. Broom still in his hand." The words hit like a brick. She sank into a chair, breath gone. "He was working?" she whispered, disbelief cracking her voice. Brian sighed. "Yeah. Never stopped." She stared at nothing, the image searing into her mind. Walter, 80, collapsing mid-sweep. "There's more," Brian added. "He left a letter in his locker. It's for you. I'm sending it." She nodded numbly, though he couldn't see. The call ended and guilt clawed at her. Had she pushed him too far, or not far enough? The letter arrived the next day, a scanned copy in her inbox. Walter's handwriting was shaky but clear. Karoline. "Didn't want your cash, but you made folks look my way. Guess that's something. Been saving 30 years, not just for that lab, for scholarships. Kids with nothing, like I was. Gave 'em a shot. Don't feel bad. I went out my way. Thanks, kid." Her eyes blurred with tears. Scholarships? She reread it, stunned. The lab wasn't his whole dream. It was a piece. He'd funneled decades of wages into kids she'd never met. A secret legacy, bigger than anyone knew. Her fundraiser, her fight, had cracked it open, even if he'd hated her for it. She called Brian back, voice trembling. "He funded scholarships? How do we miss this?" Brian exhaled. "No one knew. He kept it quiet, paid straight to the district, anonymous. The lab was all he ever mentioned." Karoline's chest tightened. "And I tried to take that from him," Brian cut in, firm. "You didn't. You woke people up. The kids built that lab because of you." She hung up, reeling. The science room, named for Walter, had been unveiled days ago, a quiet ceremony she'd missed. Students had cut the ribbon, proud of their work. She'd thought it was her failure's footnote. Now it felt like something else. Then the bomb dropped. Brian texted her a link. "Check the local paper. Ethan's screwed." She clicked and there it was, front page, Caldwell exposed in Hensley cover-up. Someone had leaked Walter's letter to the press and with it, proof Ethan had known about the scholarships for years. A former school board member confirmed it. Ethan, a self-styled community pillar, had stumbled on Walter's payments a decade back and buried it, fearing it'd outshine his own loud donations. He'd played the philanthropist while silencing a better man. The town erupted. Posts on X called him a fraud. Old friends cut ties. Ethan vanished from social media, chased out by the truth. Karoline sat back, stunned. "You bastard," she muttered, picturing his smirk. She dialed him, half expecting no answer. He picked up, voice ragged. "What do you want, Leavitt?" She didn't hold back. "You knew about Walter, all of it, and hid it to look good. How's that feel now?" Ethan snarled. "Don't gloat. You didn't win this, I just lost." She laughed, cold. "No, Walter won. You're the one running. Good luck with that." He hung up and she tossed the phone down. Ethan's fall was sweet, but it didn't erase her ache. Walter was gone and she'd never told him she understood. The lab's opening photos circulated online, kids beaming, Walter's name in bold. She scrolled through, a lump in her throat. His real legacy, though, was those scholarships. Dozens of students lifted from poverty, now doctors, teachers, engineers. One, a young scientist named Mia Torres, had just won a research grant. Karoline didn't know Mia was hunting for her, piecing together how a failed fundraiser had unearthed Walter's secret, changing her life. Mia's thank you lingered out there, unwritten, as Karoline packed to leave New Hampshire behind. She drove out that night, the letter folded in her bag. Ethan was ruined, Walter immortalized, but something gnawed at her. She'd stirred the pot, sure, but had she helped or hurt? The lab stood, the scholarships lived on, yet Walter had died working, not resting. Her phone buzzed. Brian again. "One more thing," he said. Found a note in Walter's desk. Says he left $50,000 to the school. Final gift. Guess who's handling it? Karoline frowned. Who? Brian's voice dropped. Linda Pierce. She's already talking renovations. Her office first. Karoline's blood ran cold. She's stealing it? Brian hesitated. Not sure. But it's hers to control now. She gripped the wheel, fury surging. Linda, the woman who'd called her a troublemaker, threatened Walter's job, now held his last act of kindness. Karoline pictured her smug face, gut twisting. That's not what he wanted, she said, voice shaking. Brian sighed. I know, too late to stop her. She hung up, staring at the road. Walter's death wasn't her fault, but this felt like a theft she'd let slip. She could fight, expose Linda, rally the town again. But she was tired. The letter burned in her bag, a quiet thanks she didn't feel she'd earned. Karoline kept driving, tears streaking her face. Walter had changed lives, hers included, while Ethan paid for his greed. But Linda's grab at that $50,000 twisted the knife. Mia, out there somewhere, carried Walter's gift forward, searching for a woman who didn't know she'd mattered. Karoline wouldn't hear her gratitude, wouldn't see the ripple she'd started. Walter's broom, his scholarships, his lab, they'd outlast them all. Yet Linda's hands on his money left a bitter taste, a loose end no one saw coming. She'd planted a seed, but the harvest wasn't hers to claim. Walter's story teaches us that kindness doesn't always look like we expect. It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes rejected, yet it can still spark change beyond our sight. Karoline fought for him, stumbled, and unknowingly lit a fuse that revealed his quiet heroism. Ethan's fall and Linda's greed remind us that self-interest often blinds us to others' worth, while Walter's scholarships show how small, steady acts can outshine loud boasts. In life, we don't need permission to care, just the courage to try, even if the outcome twists away from us. Notice the Walters around you. Their strength might be silent, but it's there. Thanks for sticking with this journey. What's a lesson you've learned from someone unexpected? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear. If this hit home, subscribe for more real stories that matter and share it with someone who'd get it. See you next time.